Hello, hello. Oh, this is loud. Welcome back. I hope you had a good break. We're on to the second section today. So we have a student panel of Kimberly Tsen, Heather Goughan, and Pritesh Kshatriya. And then we have George A as the keynote speaker. So I will give the stage over to Kim.
Hello, everyone. How was your lunch? Did you guys have a good time? Awesome. Perfect. That's exactly what we want to hear. And while that's happening, how are you all doing today? Good. Good. Awesome. Hello. Hello, hello. Is it going through? Oh, perfect. There we go. All right. So, hello, everyone. My name is Kim. And before I start everything, I wanted to start this off with a little bit of a story that gives you a little bit of a wider story of why I'm doing what I'm doing. So let's start this off with 2019 first. So in 2019, I was working my dream job. I was supposedly at the top of the world, or at least that's what everyone was telling me. You see, I had landed myself a really good management position. I was a leader and I was going places and I was working hard, and everyone told me, "You're doing such a great job, Kim. You're going to go far. You're going to go places." And in 2019, I was going places. I had been promoted faster than anybody else in my position. And I was also working 14 to 16 hours a day with no days off, not even weekends. I didn't have weekends for $50,000 an hour. Sorry, a week. I wish it was a year. I wish it was a week and I wish it was an hour, but it wasn't, unfortunately. It was per year. And I thought to myself, if this is what the top of the world feels like, I don't know if I want to be here, because I was exhausted and I was burnt out. And I didn't know if I was going to make it to the next day at some point, because I was so tired. And so in December of 2019, I quit. I quit my dream job. I left an industry that I had known for over a decade. And I felt supremely alone, because I felt like I had done this complete career change and I didn't know what to do with it. But as it turns out, in 2019, 42 million other people also quit their jobs. And I thought, wow, this is a huge number. And turns out I was right, because in 2011, 23.6 million people did. But in 2022, 50.5 million people quit their jobs. More than half of what it was in 2011. And I thought to myself, why? Why were people quitting their jobs so much? And I realized that it was basically the same thing as what was happening to me. It was burnout, feeling disrespected, and having low compensation for the hours that we were putting in. And it made me realize, how did we get here? How did we get to this point where people are burning out left and right so quickly, leaving their jobs so quickly because they're just done? They're just tired. And it led me to start thinking about where this all started happening. So I started looking back and I realized there was a thing. I first started with modern business strategy because I figured this has to be something with how we're looking at the way we strategize about businesses, right? And so I looked at modern and then I compared it to what was going on now. And what I realized was that there were four main stakeholders happening here: the employees, the executives, the shareholders, and the consumer. And so when I looked at modern strategy, this one was specifically around 1940s to the 1950s, What I realized then was that things were more stable. And the reason for that was that they were doing things such as long-term thinking. And why they were doing long-term strategizing for a company's lifespan was because, for one, labor union power was much higher at that point. More people who were within the workforce was in the labor unions. And what that meant was that you had more of a saying power. There was more collaborative effort happening between executives and employees because employees had their voices heard. And so, for that reason, they considered the lifespan of a company for the sake of their employees. And so everything was just a little bit more stable here. Things were of more equal value. But then when you go to now, starting in the 1960s, we had a little thing happen, the technology revolution. And what started happening here was that the way we approached business strategy started changing. It started shifting. We weren't so much looking at a long-term thinking anymore. It was more about projects. What's the next project? What's the next thing that we can put out now? Because in the end, humans crave change. And in order for businesses to stay ahead of that, they decided we need to influence that change. And so they started thinking of like, okay, and you guys have probably all seen it. The 2016 model of a new car, and then 2017, there's another one, 2018, and it keeps going. There's a new car every single year. You're constantly trying to keep ahead of the game. And so, because of that, we shifted from long term to short term. And also, what happened was the loss of power within labor unions. Because you see, in 1953, there were 35.7% of the labor force was in a labor union of some sort. But in 2019, only 6.2% of people were, which shows a really, really huge difference in the ability for employees to be able to tell their companies, hey, I'm not feeling so great now. I think I'm working a little too hard for the amount of stuff that I have to do. And so because of that, everything started to destabilize. Employees didn't have the power that they did before. And so what I also realized here was that because of this instability, it was playing into the ability for employees to actually do what their company needed them to do. You see, companies, what they need from us is innovation, that creativity, the ability to make something new. But, and this here is called the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we're not getting our needs met as a workforce, we can't do that. Because you see, one of the most foundational pieces of this hierarchy is safety and security. And if we're not feeling secure enough in our jobs, we can't do the rest. We can't complete what businesses need from us. And so I realized that there was a gap. There was a gap between what businesses needed and what employees needed. And what that was that businesses expect more than what the employee can provide at this point. We're doing these projects after projects and burning out so fast, but businesses need those projects from us. They need the completion of those to be able to run it. And so I wanted to figure out what we could do. Because the way that we approach our workforce needs to be updated. Because you see, businesses in the past could expect what workforce did in the past, in modern strategy, because it had that long-term thinking. There was that collaborative equalness happening, but now there isn't that. So we need to update the way that we approach the workforce. And what I wanted to do was provide a solution that bridges the gap between business and worker, because right now that communication isn't exactly happening. And so I thought to myself, well, businesses, and in the effort to innovate and create new products, one of the things that they have done is turn to something called strategic design. Because rather than trying to influence the people, the consumers, what they ended up doing was say, hey, we're going to meet you where you're at, and we're going to collaborate with you so we know what you actually desire and what you actually want. So strategic design itself is people oriented. And so I took the consumer and I replaced it with workforce. And going through the strategic design, I said, okay, let's go through this process here. Let's see if I can find anything going on. And one of the processes in strategic design is called sense making. And what happened here was I said, okay, I need to figure out where exactly those gaps start occurring. Where exactly does the relationship degrade between the business and the worker? And so I started doing interviews and I started trying to figure out, like, tell me your story. I have mine, but I need yours. And I figured out a journey that they went through. And eventually I utilized that journey to then survey more people to see what their journey was. And what I discovered was that the majority of people had their degradation of the relationship in the onboarding process and when they were actually integrating into the workplace. And what that was telling me was that companies weren't actually setting up their employees for success. Because businesses are so worried about being able to get their employees working and on the ground and going that they weren't actually giving them the tools to do that part. And I said, okay, I have all this information here. What am I going to do with all of this information? I know where the gap is. I know where the degradation is. I need to develop a process. I need to develop a process that helps businesses figure out what I just figured out, because I couldn't just go to them and say, hey, you're doing things wrong and you need to fix this stuff. That doesn't work. What businesses need was somebody to say, hey, let's go through this process and figure out where exactly in your unique business these degradations are occurring. And so one of the things that I did within the COGO process is the participatory methods, which then would lead me to a collaborative prototyping, because I wanted to create a workshop that they could utilize to help. And the four main goals here was that I wanted to empower the employee to then be able to identify those areas, collaborate together, and activate an action plan that the business could then utilize. And so I created my first prototype here, and I called it the 12 stages of co-design. And I said, okay, you know what? What I'm going to do is I'm going to have all of these people who participate in this workshop go through these 12 steps. And it's a very strict process that happens. Like, I'm going to tell you exactly what you need to do, and you're going to go through it, and it's going to be great. And in this first workshop that I held, I had 5 participants in it, all of which were mid-level employees. And they were former employees of a company that they either quit or were laid off from due to the toxic work environment in there. And what I discovered was that 12 steps was way too long. People were not having it. They were like, I'm done. It was repetitive. And because of that repetitiveness, it reduced the value of that design process. But what I found did help, though, was that having those steps go through, it was easier for people to stay on track. They were able to communicate with each other pretty easily because they were all in the same position. But because there became a bit of a negative atmosphere because it was easy to lay blame that way. What ended up happening was that people were, what ended up happening was that because they were all in the same position, they just said, oh, this one other position is at fault. They are the ones that are causing all of the problems and they have to change everything. So it diminished the action plan that they created at the end because we didn't have that input from the other side. So I developed prototype 2 to try to balance that out a little bit. I took the 12 steps and then I changed it down to 10. And then I made this what was originally just this nice little PowerPoint that people were moving little sticky notes on to a card game because I wanted it to be even more collaborative and really get people talking to each other. And in this one, the second prototype workshop I had 10 participants of all different areas from one department. So they were all of different levels. And what I discovered in this one was that the card game actually provided a lot of interactivity. People were getting up, they were putting the cards down and like really just plotting things out with each other. But because it was cards and it wasn't a slide, the steps weren't as clear. So sometimes they had to turn to me and be like, I don't know what this step means. I don't know what's going on here. And I had to then show it to them. But because it was a card game and because everyone was collaborative with each other, it was a very bright atmosphere and people liked to think. They started really taking those cards and say, hey, what do you think of this or this part within the cards? And also, it made the communication more collaborative because these guys were all of different levels. They said, hey, what do you think about this? I think this part, but I want to know what you're thinking. And so I knew that that part was working there. And so that made me realize that one workshop wasn't enough to complete all of this. One workshop wasn't enough to have a COGO process, my COGO process here. And I needed to develop more from there. And so I have next steps of what I'm going to do because it doesn't just stop there. I want to take those prototypes that I did and develop it even further into a toolkit that can be bought to companies and show them, hey, we have this that you guys can utilize right here, right now, and we can get those workshops going together. It needs to be more inclusive because environments have changed within the workspace. We have hybrid environments now. We've got people working remote and in person. The card game didn't work for the remote people. And also, 10 steps, still too much. Got to take it down a little bit. And then finally, making that a little bit more of a guidance mechanics there so that people actually knew, what's going on between each step. And finally, I wanted to take the company through a journey because it wasn't just about the workshop at this point, to really get them to realize and create those action plans. And so I wanted to take them through the same process that I did for myself, which is realizing that we have something that we need to work on, making sense of what that is, collaborating with each other and ideating, creating these action plans, executing it, and then evaluating and seeing what works, and then changing it up from there so that it's uniquely for your company, for your business. And I can't do it by myself. I want to take this and push it even further, to create this into a studio firm that can take this my COGO process itself and bring it to many different companies to start that change. And I need to create a cohesive branding that'll work, that people will see and go, yes, that's the answer. That's the answer to getting my company the help that it needs. Because in the end, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take us from this contemporary strategy that we had before and bringing us to something a little bit more stable. We do have that short-term thinking. It is the way that we work now, but we need to update some processes so that we can accommodate that. And in the end, when this is all said and done, I am providing a solution that bridges the gap between a business and a worker. Thank you.
Thank you. Didn't Kim do a good job? That was awesome. So I would like to start with a question. What inspires you? Now, before you go there, I'm not asking for another tagline to a motivational cat poster. Seriously, as presumably creative people, what is it that brings you to the table of making? When I answer this question for myself, I start with a core. A center. This is my process. My process is something that I take out and reflect upon and learn from in any given creative activity so I can go back to it if I become stuck the next time around. And when I look at my process coming out from the center is several key points that allows me to be inspired by things that happen in my life. The first of which is a love of my family and friends. The second is an appreciation of nature and beauty. The third is an interest in creating happiness and joy in the audiences that may see my designs. And the last is an interest in creating handcrafted work in the designs that I make wherever appropriate. So I recently had this capstone project that I had to do, and it just so happens that two of my process points came together at the same time. My twin brother Sean just had a baby girl, and he is also a huge national parks fan. So the two of us went out looking for some photos for the baby, and we discovered some great places to go and visit. And I thought, aha, this would be a wonderful way to include design in my capstone project and nature. So we decided to make it a little bit more local. We visited the Arizona state parks. There are 38 Arizona state parks, and in my research process, we visited 34 of them. And to give you a little bit of an idea of what Arizona's biodiversity has to offer, in the north, this is an example on the left side of the slide. This is Slide Rock Park. This is a natural water park formation that people go and visit in the summertime in Sedona. And there's also apple orchards up on a plateau around this park. And on the right side of the screen is Granite Mountain Hotshots Memorial State Park. This is a little bit more of a reflective place. It is It is a memorial to 19 wildland firefighters who passed away in a fire in that area. If you go to the east, you get the first Arizona State Park. This is an archaeological protected site that was found in the 1970s. This is the first fort in Arizona, and the first string of mines in the state were protected by this fort. On the left side of the screen, you have Tombstone Courthouse. This is where legends come from in the town Too Tough to Die. As you go to the east, you get Roper Lake. That's on the right side. It's got these beautiful mountain caps and water sports area. And there's also a preserved cattle ranch in Oracle State Park. And that is on the left side of the screen. As you go to the east and on the right side, there's Buckskin Mountain. And on the left side, there's Cattail Coves. These are a part of a string of state parks that are connected by the Colorado River and are on the border with California. So this is a lot of information. There's a lot of personalities in these different natural resources. And I wanted to think about how to capture the large areas in nature and also those small moments when you're like, oh, look at that flower. That's beautiful. And I want to take a moment to just breathe and look at something very small. So this ended up being broken down into systems and scales. And for me, systems really means grid as a graphic designer, and scales is macro and micros. So I looked at, for the macro designs, some inspiration and some history, what was already successful in this and what I wanted to try myself. So this is an example of the 1930s Public Works project, the Visit America campaign. And the way that this campaign worked is that designers all over the country, they're anonymous now, ended up making drawings that were turned into screen prints. And these posters were spread around the country in order to get people to come and visit national parks. And so I did this for the state parks. In case you were wondering, screen printing is done with a photographic process. So you take a screen, expose it to film, and push ink through the back of the screen in order to make the colors layer on top of each other. So a more modern version of laying different colors on top of each other is vectorizing images. It's the same process. You take organic shapes and lay them in InDesign or Illustrator on top of each other in order to create a full image. This is Tonto Natural Bridge. This is Buckskin Mountain. This is again Roper Lake from a different view. This is Patagonia Lake. This is Tombstone Courthouse. And then this is River Island State Park. So the one thing that I really, really learned, and again, reflecting in my process, is that this was a very natural way for me to go about this first system. I come from a background of visual arts, so visually capturing the image in some kind of medium was the perfect step for me to do, and it just wasn't pushing the envelope enough. So when I went back to my next system, I thought, what could I do to make this different and more intriguing the next time around for this other system? And this was the micro system. So I thought, well, what gets really, really micro in design? And you may have seen this painting before. It's an example of pointillism. It's called The Sunday Afternoon on the Island of La Grande Jatte by George Seurat. And it's a very famous painting. It's an example of technology that we use today in halftones and pixels. They're just little points that from a distance are optically mixed by the eye. So I wanted to take this concept of halftones and zoom down into it to make my posters very macro. So a little bit about 4-color printing. It is done on angles, and these angles are used in order to make sure that a moire pattern isn't created when you view the image. So yellow is printed on a 0-degree angle. Cyan is printed on a 15-degree angle. Magenta is printed on a 75-degree angle, and black is printed on a 45-degree angle. And halftone dots are measured in an LPI, which is a lines per inch basis. So I decided to make a grid honoring these principles. So my yellow grid is exactly as I said, it's on a 0-degree angle, and every square that you see there is an inch apart. And I laid these grids on top of each other in order to create what the industry knows as a rosette. So to walk you through how this goes a little bit, this is a subtractive work. So I decided to lay a flat of color down and subtract the halftone dots. And I did the same for the cyan, again, subtractive dots coming through. And the same thing happened with the magenta, but the magenta dots are so large that you only get this little diamond pattern that happens when they just barely not touch. And then the black, I had to select a typeface that really worked well for this. So I found it's called a 2-point dot typeface that has been constructed on that 45-degree angle of the halftone black dots. And then as soon as the screen decides to work again, I will show you what it's like when it's coming together. So one of the concepts that I was really working with this is what happens when you print colors separately. Very similar to the screen printing, I wanted to do overprinting for this concept. So I would lay the yellow through the screen first, and then lay the cyan right on top of that so that the printer could actually mix the colors for me. And that is the magenta on top of that, with the black to get the final image. And this is an Engelmann prickly pear. And then I did an ocotillo flower. All of these images were really focused on honoring that center of the rosette so people could see the patterns fully and how they laid on top of each other. This is a jacaranda flower. This was kind of exciting for me because I was looking at the flower clump rather than the individual flowers to see what kind of shape that would make. And then this is the San Pedro night blooming flower. This is another example of the reductive method. And I'd like to end by asking my same question again. What inspires you? And offer just a little bit of advice. Always remember to allow your process to teach you just as much as you are learning through it. Thank you. And now my friend Pritesh Kshatriya is going to talk to you next.
Oh, wow. That was a great presentation, Heather. Yeah. Thank you. So hello, everyone. My name is Pritesh Kshatriya, and I have done my bachelor's in textile designing. And right now I'm pursuing my master's in visual communication design. And this capstone project is really important for me because I'm trying to merge my textile designing knowledge with visual communication design knowledge. So I hope you guys like it. Uh, so do you guys know that we humans consume tremendous amount of natural resources on a daily basis? So even what we wear releases or uses a lot of energy. It releases a lot of toxic chemicals. Uh, and when we are manufacturing our garments, the garments have been transported, and it releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the nature. There are a lot of social inequities, and while we wash our garments, the chemicals and the microfibers are washed into the water, which causes harm to the marine life and the coral reefs. So, do you guys know the clothes on your back? How sustainable are they? So, there are dark sides of textile industries. Uh, I was having some case studies, so I came across these dark side. Um, so, almost 2,700 liters of water has been used to manufacture one T-shirt, which is sufficient for one guy to drink it for 2.5 years. So 2 kgs of chemicals are being used to manufacture 1 kgs of co- cotton garments, and most of the manufacturing industries use chromium to manufacture their products, which helps in speeding up the process. 10% of carbon dioxide has been released by clothing industries, which is more than all emission of flights and shipping industries together. Textile industry is one of the most polluting industries in the world. It produces almost 40 million tons of waste each and every year, which is almost equal to cutting down 15 million trees. So the solution over here is sustainable textiles. Sustainable textiles are the textiles which refers as uh, which have been produced using environmental and social responsibility methods. The few methods are eco-friendly methods like uh, using eco-friendly materials like organic fabrics and sustainable ways of dyeing, recycling and upcycling our own garments, reducing water usage, which can be really helpful for the nature, and using renewable energies like uh, wind energy and solar energy to uh, manufacture or produce our garments. So while manufacturing or producing our garments, does it involves fair labor practices? Were the labor being paid good? Does it involve any kind of child labor into it? So sustainable fashion is not just a trend; it's a revolution for a better future. Moving forward. So when I was doing some case studies, I came across a few global issues. Bangladesh textile sector. It is known as a textile hub, which produces large amount of textiles and transports and exports it all over the world. Sorry, and as it produces large amount of textile, it also produces large amount of waste. Um, and this waste has been washed into the water, and as a result, there are no existence of coral reefs in Bay of Bengal. Next case study was Uzbekistan's cotton industries. Uzbekistan government were forcing children into the cotton field to pluck cottons to harvest cottons, because if a tall guy is harvesting cotton, he has to bend and pluck cotton, which takes a lot of energy and a lot of efforts. Whereas a small child just does not have to do much effort; he just goes and plucks over there, and it's really quick for them. So this also resulted in a lot of illness for the small children, and they were not even paid good. So uh, I want you guys to know about some basic knowledge of dyeing process. Moderating is one of the most important process of dyeing the fabrics. Moderants are the substance which helps in creating the bond between the fabrics and the color. So industries use chromium, aluminium, copper, tin, iron to uh, modern their fabrics to so that the color lasts long, and which is really harmful for our nature. Whereas natural moderns are like alum, soy milk, vinegar, baking soda, and Epsom salt, and which is really available next to our dough. So I want you guys to try your own just sustainable textile. And few process which I went through is like I wanted to come up with a quilt, so I cut the fabric into 5 by 5 squares, and before exposing the fabric uh, to the colors, I exposed the fabric to alum, and I dipped it into the hot water and let it boil for 1 hour, so that the color can last longer period on it. Then I used turmeric. I made a dye bath of it. I boiled it for almost 1 hour, and it really gave me uh, a bright yellow color. And this was the fabric which I came up with. This was dyed by me. Um, Moving forward, then I used beetroot to extract more color out of beetroot. I grinded it, then I boiled it. Then I put, put the fabric which was exposed with alum, and it gave me light pink color. Then I moved ahead with spinach. To extract color from spinach, I had to add salt to it, and I again boiled it for 1 more hour, and it gave me a green color. Uh, then when I came to red cabbage, I chopped the red cabbage. Again, I had to add salt to it to extract the color out of it, and it gave me a purple color. When I came to black beans, so dyeing process for the black beans was a little different, and I have to soak the black beans in the refrigerator for 2 days, and it gave me a really bright blue color, and it was really interesting. So now I wanted to challenge myself, like if I expose these fabrics just to alum, I wanted to try something new. I wanted to expose these fabrics with different mordants, like vinegar and baking soda. It was really interesting to know for me. Uh, Hold on a sec. Yeah, sorry. So yeah, it was really interesting for me to know when I used baking soda. So the color of the fabric turned into light color because the pH value of the baking soda made it more alkaline, and whereas vinegar made it more brighter because the solution dye bath turned into more acidic. But when I came to dye with baking soda and red cabbage, it turned into green, and whereas vinegar turned into red. And it similarly goes with black beans, and it the baking soda turned into green and the vinegar turned into blue. Sorry, pink. Uh, and then I dyed few t-shirts out of it. And now I wanted to put some visual communication into this, the graphic designing. So I wanted to come up with like I did some case study again, and I found this adinkara. Adinkara is a process which is used as so, which has been used by African people and Ghana. It's a really old, like 1817. Uh, it was used in 1817. These days, it's really rare. The young generation is not ready to take it ahead, which is really bad for us. But um, Adinkara is a pictorial representation of ideas and proverbs, and it each and every symbols had some meaning, which were printed on fabrics, potteries, wall prints, and woodcuts. And they also use sustainable ways of dyeing and printing the fabrics. Um, so um, I was not allowed. I did little bit more study. I was not allowed to print the same kind of symbols on the fabrics of Adinkara as well as the Native Americans. Sorry. So I to get some inspirations to come up with my own symbols or own motives. I went on inspiration on a trip for like Sonoran Desert, and I clicked few images of desert of botanical garden over here, and then I took those sketches on and on those photos and those inspiration. I sketched few images out of it, and then I took these sketches into Illustrator and converted it into laser cutting laser cutting file, and I did some laser cutting. I sourced the wood and did the laser cut, uh, and then I came up with a quilt with the same sustainable methods of the way I dyed the fabric, and I did some block printing on them. And then this I even dyed with I block printed the t-shirts. Uh, and as a conclusion, dyeing was really wild for me because uh, it was an element of surprise. It was rewarding. It was stress relief. It was sustainable. It was non-toxic, and it was unique. So, do you guys know what will be your wild textile? Give it a try. Thank you. I would like to call George or for the student panel. Yeah. Oh, good job.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is George A. I'm going to be the facilitator for today for this panel and also the presenter in just a little while. Similar to Teresa earlier, I will be looking at my phone and not checking my texts, but I will want to try to see if I can check in on some of my notes. Thank you all so much for your presentations and congratulations on very imminent graduation and also for these presentations. Because the range of projects that you showed was so varied, I want to try and see if I can maybe speak to things at a slightly different level than individual projects and try to see if I can span across them. Maybe firstly, starting out, I'm curious, since starting the program, which was for you maybe, 2 years ago? Three, there you go. Have you seen non-designers, maybe like your parents, for instance, more familiar, so their familiarity with design go up, stay the same, or even go down? General familiarity with design, because I feel like it is in the air in ways that perhaps it hasn't been. It feels like it's just, from my perspective, only ever going up. But I'm curious to know if any other your non-designers that are in your lives, where that familiarity has changed at all.
So, speaking about my parents, they had a little bit of an understanding of what design was. My dad's a little bit old fashioned, so he used to call design commercial art, which is probably an Andy Warhol kind of term. But I also had the wonderful ability to work with non designers in some of my classes. And so that was a great way to really gauge what kind of knowledge there is of design out there. And I think there's a general awareness of what design is, but not a specific awareness of what designers do. So it's been kind of interesting to teach that to people while working with them at the same time.
For me, my mom was the inspiration to take me into the designing field. She is an artist. She used to sketch. She used to paint. She did some beautiful wood carvings. Since my childhood, I've been seeing my mom doing all this artworks and all. And uh, I wasn't I was not much interested in the designing before. I was too much into sports and too much into with my friends and engineering. I went for engineering, but later on when I realized that designing is a beautiful field and this course has literally taught me to how to think like a designer. So I love this field and I love the experience which I'm having right now. And when it comes to non-designing people, I have few friends like who are totally engineers who does not care about the alignment, does not care about the beautiness of anything. So I do try to explain them, but yeah, it's a little hard for the to make them understand. But yeah, they are changing a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. In the industry that I came from was restaurants, and there's a lot of people in restaurants who also believe that they are good designers in there because they do a lot of their own marketing and stuff like that. And so once I came into design, I was first inundated with a lot of questions like, "Oh, does this look good? Does that look good?" Um, but I think it was interesting because I got to kind of show them a little bit more of what design was about because it wasn't just what's being put right in front of you right here, right now. It wasn't just, oh, this looks pretty. There you go. It's ready to be published. It was more of there's so much more purpose behind what you're doing with design. And it was nice for me to be able to then explain to them, hey, just because per se this font pairs well with what you have right there, your placement of it, people may not actually be able to see it very well. So I was able to kind of do that. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, I guess I'm also hearing from across all three of you actually almost a intuitive desire to want to teach a little, or explain, or at least provide some rationale. Do you feel any kind of obligation to have to do that with, again, non-designers? I don't know if you need to make everybody a convert to become a designer per se, but do you feel any type of sense of, I kind of want you to get this because I love design and I still love it. I'm still a big fan, if that doesn't sound too silly. And I'm constantly trying to find, like, why this is amazing, and I'm always hoping to find people who would at least appreciate it.
Um, I'll answer first.
Yes, please.
So for me, I thought it was fun because it was an opportunity to share something that they didn't per se know about. Um, and like teaching wise, oh, I lost my train of thought there. I was like, I'm going somewhere, but now it's gone. But no, it was fun for me to be able to do so because now I was presenting something that they didn't necessarily know about. So for me, yeah, I liked it, and in a way I felt kind of obligated because I wanted to make sure that their stuff was actually going out properly and that people would get the message that they were trying to come across with.
So I love telling people what design is and teaching them about it. As creative people, I think we all have a little bit of an ego, so there's there's part of that in there too. But just being excited about what you're working on and what you're working with just seems like a very natural human thing. So of course, I want to share people what my designs are and show them off and explain my thinking behind it and also the research. It's not just a piece of art. There's things that we put into it in order to make it a design, not just art.
In this world, everyone has a designer into it. Everyone is a designer some or the other way. Even the client at the end moment comes and like change the beautiful design into like in his own perspective. So yeah, I try my best to make people understand like what is design basically. But yeah, people are changing. People do understand it. But yeah, they have to focus more, and they are too much focus into their field and not bothering about the designing skills and all. So that's what affects them.
Thank you. I heard a little early from just yourself a little early around the idea of maybe seeing the world as a designer. You were mentioning perhaps your mother may have helped you, perhaps give you some of that sense that there is a view to be had. I can imagine that I'm having that influence on my children also right now, for good or bad. I think there's probably a part of me that, I don't know, would feel disappointed if they ended up as an actuary, for instance. I don't know why. That's a perfectly reasonable job to have, I guess. But part of me would like for them to become a designer. But I feel like there's an influence. I guess I'd be curious to know, how would you describe what does it look like to look through the eyes of a designer?
The world looks really beautiful, and when you want to change something, you really want to change it. I feel being a designer, I feel that I am the responsible person to make the world more beautiful and make the world more systematic. Uh, and uh, yeah, I lost my word.
No, I would have said actually there's a number of friends of mine who feel cursed by it because they look at kerning on menus, for instance, and they can't actually order food because they're so distracted by things they find as
It
problems.
started happening with me when I went to restaurants and I started look at the menus and all, look at the billboards and all. Yeah, so it started happening to me when I started learning, getting into more into designing field. But it's really interesting and it's a really amazing world. It's really colorful, and I'm loving this.
So I thought it was interesting that you mentioned your friends who thought they always had to fix the menu. That was one of the things that came into my mind right away, that being a designer is like being a fixer. You have to be able to wear multiple hats and sometimes look at the rag on the sentences or design for a poster or design for a glitchy symposium. There are just many things that designers get to do, and I find that exciting, and the problem solving that comes along with it is really cool.
I think for me, being able to see through the eyes of a designer was finding the purpose behind every action that you do. And I always found that part really, really interesting because from an outside perspective, it was always, oh, you just make it pretty, just make it pop. How many of us as designers have been told just make it pop a little bit? But then when you realize it's like it's not just pop, it's purpose behind it. What are you trying to do with that pop part? And so as somebody who's like worked in restaurants before, I'm used to getting the magic broken. For me, I'm just like, oh, now I know what goes on in the kitchen. Like, I know what goes on behind the doors. And now this is another thing where I'm like, I know what goes on behind the doors here. Like, I know now if I'm looking at a commercial, oh, this is the message that you're trying to give me. And then for me then to then analyze it and say, oh, is it working? I don't know. Like, let's find out. And so that was kind of the fun part of it, was being able to now see it with a purposeful sort of look to it.
Yeah, I guess I could pick up on that a little and say, like, now that you've gone through the program and maybe seen how, as it were, the sausage is made, and now perhaps going to start entering the industry and continue to work this way, are there any things you're not that excited about, seeing as now you know how to do it, sort of quote unquote? And are there aspects perhaps you're still hopeful for, maybe to balance out?
I think for me, the part that I'm not so excited about is still having to figure out how to make something pop. Because I've been told that so much at this point, and being able to say like, oh, I have this great thing, it's going to do this for you, and like these are the things that to take away from here, and they're like, yeah, but can you make that green pop? And I'm like, what does that mean to you? What does that green mean to you? So that's probably the one that I'm least excited about. But what I'm most excited about, yes, sorry, I forgot the second half. What I'm most excited about, though, is also, and it's kind of interesting just playing into it, is this sort of puzzle solving that happens in design, because people do give you very vague instructions, and they give you a lot of just try making sort of come out of there. And I'm like, okay, let's actually just make magic happen. Because for us, we know what's going on, and we're kerning, and we're placing things in very specific areas, but to them it's like magic. Kind of like how food comes to your table when you eat it and it's delicious, and it's like that magic, you're sent somewhere with it. And that's what I kind of love the most about design.
Yeah, I'm hoping that something can still stay magical.
This is a little bit of a different answer, but what I'm least excited about is web design. It's not my favorite. But I know some wonderful people who I can definitely refer for website design if that ever comes my way. But what I'm really, really excited about is starting. We've gone through 3 years of school, and we've all worked extremely hard in order to get through this degree, and we're all so excited to be graduating next week. So I'm just really interested in seeing where this design journey will take me.
What I'm not excited about is there is always a last minute edit. So even though you submit it, the client comes back, the boss comes back that you have to change this. And
Final.
So I have like, even this presentation I presented, I had like 6 finals, and this was the 7th one. So yeah, and the one which excites me a lot is like be calling myself as a designer. Yeah, and really excited to hit the field. Really excited to showcase my skills at a good platform. That's what is motivating me a lot.
Can I pick up on that last point, actually, the idea of calling yourself a designer? I feel like I do a pretty good impression of one. I still feel quite nervous about it because I don't quite identify as that yet, even after now, 20 plus years. And I struggle because I feel like I've worked alongside people who do claim it. And when I've worked in some of these studios, it's like someone who's doggy paddling, swimming next to Michael Phelps. And I feel like, oh, that's not me. It's very stressful. So I still feel very nervous about it. I guess I'm curious to know how confident you feel about those terms. Do you feel like you can do it naturally now? And also, I guess to a degree, like, have you felt any gatekeeping around those terms, around what becomes a professional designer? Because I never saw myself as a leader in the design field for a long, long time.
Yeah, even I'm not a leader in the design field right now. I'm just stepping into it. Yeah, but I just went blank. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, just curious about just how do you feel like becoming this term, the designer? And do you get to call yourself designer because you get paid for it? That counts.
No, I'm not working for the money over here. Like money is like the secondary thing. I'm working for the education. I'm working for the knowledge. I'm working for the experience. Um, so yeah, I'm not that pitch perfect right now. I'm still like paddling next to the Phillips, but uh, at trying efforts, trying to come up more, trying to learn from each and every way. Designing is a really huge field. I'm just a visual communication over here. There are industrial designers. There are many designers over here. So I cannot call myself exactly perfect over here. Like I'm not nowhere there yet. I'm just a beginner over here. So yeah, life is hard. It's all of
And in conclusion, life is hard. Got it.
yeah.
Good, good, good.
And it's all about hard work.
Sure, sure.
I'm not sure about any gatekeepers. I think the biggest gatekeeper is probably yourself. I have a good friend who's a proper doctor, and sometimes they still think that they're, in med school learning. So I just feel like you might wake up someday and feel like you're a proper designer with a capital D, or you might never feel like you're truly doing it. But, fake it till you make it.
I feel like I make designs, but I don't know if I'm a designer yet because at least in my eyes, my mother was a fashion designer and she's phenomenal. Like the work that she creates is just gorgeous. And I look at myself and I'm just like, ooh, that's like not great sort of thing. So it's like sometimes I feel like, oh, I've made a really good design. And sometimes I don't make a good design and I'm like, oh, I'm not a very good designer. I'm more likely to call myself not a good designer rather than calling myself, oh yeah, like that I'm a designer now. So it's an interesting journey that I'm curious to see if I'll ever call myself a designer or if I'll just say, yeah, I make designs.
Yeah, I sometimes bring this up because I go through some identity questions at the classes I teach around identity that was claimed, identity that was placed on you, identity that that you earned, and I think interpretations of those questions can really vary. And even the term designer can come with a lot of baggage, even upon graduation. Maybe if I'd asked this question at the beginning of the program, it might have been different. Who knows? Just a couple more. This is a tricky time because you're about to graduate. What are your expectations for a few weeks from now? You got the thing in the mail. You're no longer officially. I think is your card access cut off? I mean, how do you you officially will be graduated? Are you hopeful for the job market? How are things looking? How are you looking? How are you feeling about this?
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure I get a lot of sleep.
Great.
I think that's like a primary focus. And after I get that sleep, I'm going to say, okay, let's start this process and see what's going on out there. I think it's an interesting time to be a designer, especially somebody who works in visual communications or graphic design. I think it's an interesting time because you're seeing a lot of sort of shifts and changes that are happening right now. And I'm curious to see how that goes and how, for me, to be able to embrace that and take it and change with it as well. So I don't have like a particular answer for you, but just I'm curious too to see how it goes.
Yeah.
So I'm actually moving in a couple of weeks.
Oh, wow.
So that'll be fun. And then after that, I'm going to get married in about a year.
Oh.
So hopefully between now and then, I find myself a job that allows me to learn more about design and grow as a person and pay the bills.
It's really hard for me because I'm an international student over here, and I'll have to find an OPT over here. Then I have to go look for some jobs which are sponsoring me H1B. So it's a hard phase, but yeah, being a designer, I'm here to serve humans. Like yeah, whatever I'm doing for the well-being, for the better future, and I hope the hard work pays one day. And yeah, I'm also going to take a deep sleep after this. Yeah.
Same, I forgot
Sounds
that.
great.
Yeah.
I can very much relate with the H-1B. It was something I had to go through a long time. It's actually it was actually a little more restrictive than I realized. I don't know if you know this, but if you're an H-1B holder, you're actually not allowed to have any other income from any other source without violating your visa. So it's actually pretty strict. It's pretty hardcore.
But at least they are lucky.
Yes, indeed. But it's something to watch out for.
Okay, thank you.
I'm not quite sure on timing. Are we at time, overtime? We're on time. Are there any other final thoughts you want to share with the room?
I don't have much though. If I come back, I'll just.
Of course.
I'll circle back around. My biggest thought is I am just very grateful to my classmates for being such wonderful people throughout this journey. And I'm thankful to my fiance, PHO, for sticking with me through it, and my parents, who obviously financially supported. So just a ton of gratitude for everything that I've gone through the past 3 years. That's mostly on my mind.
I think for me, the biggest lesson that I've learned out of all of this is to take it as it comes. As somebody who started it out saying, like, I have this very set journey in 5 years, I'm going to do this and I'm going to land this job and do this role. And as you guys saw from my presentation, that did not happen whatsoever. And going through this program, I learned a lot about just embracing yourself and your curiosities and learning, and just seeing how all of us, because there's a particular part of our cohort that came from plus year, which meant that we came from a different background in design. And so just being able to see how all of us, including those who did come from a design background, grows and grew over these last few years. There's nothing better than that, really.
Well, wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's please congratulate this panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay. Look at that. How exciting. Okay, I think we might be ready. Do we have enough people back from outside? Are we good to go? Okay, fantastic. And I really hope that the screen stays fairly stable, but I think it will. Yes. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is George A. I'm one of the co-founders of Greater Good Studio. We're based in Chicago, and I'm really, really honored to be here. A couple of firsts, actually, for me. This is my first time at ASU. It's my first time being in 99-degree weather in April, was I guess maybe May. And it's the first time I've fit into the suit in about 3 years. So a lot of firsts today. Very excited. A few things. If you have feedback for me now or later on, or really anytime, we're available on these handles, and I would love to be able to hear your thoughts about this presentation and the work that we do. I'm curious how many folks here in this room are familiar with the term human-centered design? And if you are, maybe could you raise your hand? Okay, that's a few. And if you aren't, that's totally fine. Human-centered design tends to present itself as a clear set of process steps. And these are the cute color graphics that we have at our studio. There are many places that have cute color graphics that describe the studio's process. And what it describes essentially is we like to look and understand humans as they are, try to see if we can understand what perhaps new insights could be about those humans, and then offer new responses. And I want to tell you an amazing story around how human-centered design changed the lives of absolutely millions of people. And it starts with these two designers at Stanford. I'm going to try to read some of these quotes. Monzies and Bowen approached smokers on campus and asked them what they loved and hated about their habit. Their complaints were consistent: fear of being seen with a cigarette and paranoia about smelling of smoke on a first date. Isn't that a good insight? Their first prototypes were ad hoc assemblies of bespoke components and items found on drugstore shelves. You can see that they're actually practicing what they were taught at Stanford around human-centered design, understanding humans as they are, designing and understanding sort of potentially new insights around those behaviors, and then creating new responses. Now, this is where the story goes, unfortunately, a little bit sideways, because that was actually the story of the Julie cigarette. The product, I think, originally in earnest started around smoking cessation, but as decisions around this product's efficacy started coming up, and I imagine ethical questions around what could happen to a product is as highly addictive as a new method of nicotine transference. Somewhere, somebody thought, what will go really well with this? Add it to our addiction portfolio, which is exactly what Philip Morris then did in 2018. This type of product is, I believe, helpful in some cases, but decisions around its efficacy and maybe what should be done with it clearly go a little bit awry when you can see Juul marketing mango-flavored pods. Clearly decisions around sort of what could become a adult-only product for those who have the autonomy to be able to make decisions about the health. And then young people, particularly teenagers, fruit-flavored pods as they have them, starts to become kind of concerning. Actually have it here. It's a tiny little device. I'd love it if I could pass it around. I'd love to get it back as well, please. It's super cool. Look at that thing. It's tiny. It's USB charged. It's actually like a technological marvel. But it's also really concerning. It makes me beg the question, how did we lose our way? How did the design team, how did their professors, how did Stanford not see this coming? And I think along the way of it becoming such a huge market product, market dominating offering, there were still no checks and balances to stop it from becoming an enormous public health crisis. And I bring up these questions because I think there's something about design at its core that might not know how to prevent this from happening again in the future. Is the clicker working? Oh, sorry. Can somebody just advance? I could just tell you. Next slide, please. It's back to working again. So design has adapted and diverged into many threads over many decades, and I think that many of you might identify on different branches of this family tree. I know with the training I had around engineering and industrial design, I'm on a different branch than probably many of you who are taking through this course. But at its root, design has a few aspects that I believe make it a bit of a liability when it starts to encroach upon things that are not just business problems, but much more social in nature. Things that perhaps design is not necessarily built for or ready for. Now, it's not as though design hasn't had many, many kinds of guidelines on what good design ought to be. These are the 10 that I've referred to as an industrial designer for many years as a design professor from Dieter Rams. Dieter Rams is still a living legend. And across his 10 rules for good design, his 10 principles, you can see that if you actually, where is the Juul product now? Somewhere in the rows? Yeah, if you take a look at it, it would have passed all of these tests. If you look at number 6 in particular, good design is honest. That thing will honestly kill you. So something about these 10, which I refer to as like the canonical 10, is missing because it will still allow a product like the Juul e-cigarette, as cool as it is and as destructive as it is, to also pass. It makes me think that what we have mostly is a craft-based system for deciding what good design is. And I think what we are lacking is an ethical-based system, something that might provide a little more guidance in areas that are a little bit outside of traditional design purview, outside of these business questions. And what we have in its place tends to be what I'm casually calling a BYOE situation, a bring your own ethics game. Everyone in this room has their own ethical standards, whether you explicitly say that you do, or you just feel like you do. And because of that BYOE scenario, every team you work in has a hodgepodge of different BOYE standards. And therefore, every team has an amalgam of them. Every studio has this BYOE, making it feel as though we don't really have a clear framework overall as an industry. Can you see the problem with that? So let me back up a little. I'm one of the co-founders of a company called Greater Good Studio. We're based in Chicago, and we work exclusively in the social sector. And we have a few of these founding beliefs that I wanted to mention because I think it helps ground some of the work we do. We believe the status quo is unacceptable and has existed for a long time. Lived experience is expertise, and it's a completely valid form of expertise that I often think gets relegated and diminished. And that design actually can be transformative, not only for people who participate in the problems and the projects, but actually us as a design team too. We become transformed through that process. And in doing our work, we repeatedly end up working on these evergreen issues, the ones that sort of persistently exist in society and have done for decades. And the kind of effort to take to maybe try to dismantle them can't be done in a typical project format, can't really be squeezed into really a semester. And I think the idea that perhaps when design would work on these projects as like a 2-week-long vacation, as like a give back program, always felt as though it was sort of misunderstood or naively thought they could try to fix it, when if it took decades to build up, it's probably going to take decades to dismantle. And unfortunately, for a lot of the time that I worked as a commercial designer prior to the studio, and probably even now, I had these moments where BYOE might flare up, and it would flare up as this thing, this quiet little voice. Are folks familiar with the idea of a quiet little voice? I think many of you probably do. There's some nodding heads. And I think it's your conscious speaking up. And when it does, that's your ethics trying to come out, even if you might not use that language. To my chagrin, slightly to my embarrassment, I'd say with these 10 examples, I've had particularly bad answers, if no answers at all, when questions like this would flare up in me. I'm going to read these out if I can. What is design's relationship to power and privilege? Which humans do we center when we say human-centered design? How can we say no to work when we need to pay off our student debt, for instance? Design is often sink or swim, but why is drowning even an option? It is a brutal industry. How do designers decide which people in need to serve? How do we wean design's addiction from whiteness? Why doesn't toxic leadership get called out for what it is, which is mostly unprocessed workplace trauma? Why does philanthropy, not community, set the agenda for social change? What's the cost of speaking up, and what's the cost if we don't? And if those weren't already hard enough, this last one's real doozy. What right do I have to do this work? These questions keep me up at night, and they still do. But I know that throughout my commercial career, I never wanted to look at these in the face. I ducked my face, turned down, looked away every time. So I'm not expecting anybody to have a great answer to these two, but I think unless you know to name them, you might also run away like I did. I feel like our industry and perhaps our programs that we teach in train our designers and our students to say yes to everything, with perhaps a few guidelines or maybe how. We don't get a lot of training on how to say no. And I wish that was part of our schooling. I wished it was disciplinary, strategic, deliberate moments where we are training our students to say no on their own terms. And to be able to say no without sounding like you're complaining is a skill. These observations around design and education, and I think I mentioned it on the panel, I'm not still sure if I totally identify as a designer, kind of give me this sense of being able to be a little bit of an outsider and try to make observations around them, whether it's around design education and power, whether it's around asking questions about what really does good look like in commercial design or the social sector, or in writing about my time through experiencing a lot of workplace trauma. My position as a bit of an outsider allows me, I think, to write these observations and try to share them as a way for me to process. Now, to go back to that article around power, I want to try and see if I can define it for us because I think it's a helpful ground plane. We're going to talk about it a number of times. This quote from my co-founder here, her definition is, power is the ability to change another person's reality. I find that to be a really succinct way to describe a phenomena that a lot of people might describe as something that presidents have or world leaders have, and that surely a young student might not have coming out of grad school. I don't think that's true. I think everybody has it. But when you think about how much power you have, and maybe how there have been moments throughout the last 3 years where your reality has been changed overnight, that might be a sign of how much power someone has over you. adjacent to this definition for power is the idea of power asymmetry. I find it really, really helpful to think about this because I've heard of the term power dynamics. Are folks familiar with that? Or maybe the phrase, man, there was some really weird power dynamics in that room. So I found dynamics to be not very clear to me. So I found asymmetry as a good synonym to say, if it is lopsided, that means somebody has more than everyone else. And in those situations, I go, oh, I know what you mean. I'm going to visualize it a little further. Check this out. I'm going to make a big triangle. And I'm going to put people who typically don't have much power all the way on the sharp pointy end, and people who typically have power all the way on the wide wedge end. What that typically describes is an awful lot of power asymmetry baked into these relationships. Relationships like law enforcement with detainees, doctors with their patients, employers with their employees, funders to grantees, teachers to students, it goes on and on. In fact, I'd say almost every relationship I can really think about has asymmetry in it, which means that both sides tend to have almost like typecast roles that are very difficult to get out of because we feel like we're kind of stuck. And you're stuck because of asymmetry. Now, the reason we draw this line over there where it says Greater Good Studio, that is an indication of slight embarrassment of how far Greater Good Studio as a commercial business, we're a for-profit business, although we do a good impression of a nonprofit, how far aligned we are with those with great power. Even though we often work for those without power, we are very chummy with those who have it. Can anyone see a problem with that? Awkward. I mean, we're actually at risk of making things worse through the project itself. Just signing the contract might make the whole situation worse, which means perhaps we shouldn't have to say yes every time. Even though we want to be in business, we don't want to be in business to make this worse. That would undo everything. But unless we name the phenomena of being aligned with the most powerful, we will pretend that we're helping when actually we're not. I find this quote from Alice Walker so helpful. The most common way people give up their power is by thinking they don't have any. And I want maybe the grad students to take a note of this, because I think those with great power are really interested in keeping you there. I would prefer you to try to remember how much power you do actually have, maybe in as limited capacity as it is because you're still at the early part of your career, but you don't have zero. And I think those with great power tend to make sure that this is something that they are trying to exacerbate. So because we often feel like we're stuck in asymmetry to people who have power, perhaps those who could give us new contracts, we had to come up with ways to maybe disrupt the asymmetry that was baked into our roles as consultant with clients. So we did this thing. We've done it now for years. We call it a gut check. We run all our business development through it every Monday, and we try to see if we can get to the core of the question embedded in these projects. And what we found, surprisingly, is that really not every question warrants an answer. As in, not every project that has an RFP needs a proposal. Not everything that you get asked, you have to say yes to. Does that make sense? You don't have to jump every time someone asks you to. Sometimes you can go, that's bullshit. And perhaps you should. Sometimes the people asking the questions also feel like they have asymmetry and can't change it either. It could be quite liberating to have to say, I'm going to say no to you. They're like, you can say no to me. Can I say no? I didn't know I could do that. It can be quite revelatory. And over the last 12 years, as proud as I am about our products, our studio's portfolio, it's actually also the breakups, the ones we said no to, that we've also really proud of having as experiential evidence. We've now done about 50 breakups, with the single largest one being over $2 million from USAID, which is the federal government's agency for international development. 2 million is not small potatoes. For a small company at 3 years old, that would have been huge. But the asymmetry we felt in that moment was unlike anything we'd ever seen, and probably still since. There was no way out of that project alive, and would only have made things worse if we had accepted. So we turned it down. We walked away. Even though we got greenlit to be prime, being prime contract for a USAID project is huge. It would guarantee years of business. But we knew that that would only make things worse. Now, you might be thinking, that must be nice, George, saying no. As a small business, you have the autonomy to do so. I can tell you for sure, it is terrifying. It still is. This is the very first breakup email I ever had to write. It was with a program officer at Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. The project was about $100,000. Again, not small potatoes for us. And in that email, it spent probably 8 hours writing and rewriting, trying to work out how am I going to get out of this awkwardness. And I found by writing an email like this, I thought, actually, that's not a bad format here. What if there's a structure? And I've relied on this structure now over 50 times. I'd love it if folks could take a picture, because then they can maybe save some time in writing their first breakup emails. Because you have to say thank you, because it's nice to be asked. Say no right up front. Don't bury the lead. You say, it's not you, it's me. I have these issues. And then try to give your justification. That justification part is really key. Are you sure? Like there are some times when we sometimes make things obfuscate, where we say things like, it's not a good cultural fit, or we don't have capacity. That is avoidance of comfort. You're trying to be comfortable, both for yourself and your client. You need to get specific. And what you do by getting specific is you actually say, I have boundaries. Those boundaries are real. And what's amazing when he says, let's stay friends, because you'll likely run into these people again, because they will never, can I swear? Never, they will never fucking forget you. You break up with somebody, forever see it into their memory. Going back to design, I'd say that without deliberate intervention, design rarely serves society. Design is really built to do a few things really well, and you have to do a lot of adaptation, a lot of leveraging, a lot of arm wrestling to try to get it out of its typical lane to do complex social issues. Do you guys remember this? There was this pursuit for years of designers trying to be CEO or get to the C-suite and trying to see how we can get design to scale. It was like the drumbeat for 10 plus years. And in the pursuit of trying to get to scale, I think we've perhaps not noticed that we've been causing harm at scale. Design is an accelerant to almost anything it touches, particularly technology. And when it gets attached to certain things that are hell-bent on getting to scale only, without any caution about anything else, we can be destructive. Not every time, but the risk is there. Are folks familiar with this? This is the brand mark of the East India Company. And the quote here from the National Trust in the UK. The East India Company, started around 1600 AD, was probably the most powerful corporation in history. At its height, it dominated global trade between Europe, South Asia, and Far East, fought numerous wars using its own army and navy, and conquered and colonized modern-day India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and my home country, Burma. The utility of a mark like this is not only to accelerate colonization, but to also accelerate capital, accelerate the movement of capital. So design and capitalism, design and colonization have been hand in hand for hundreds of years. I feel like it's fair to say that design is particularly good at two things, the first of which I'd say may be most obvious, to help build capital. But there's something about design that I think is also true that I hadn't noticed until recently. The idea of wanting to seek comfort. Both designers and their clients are interested in design playing a role towards becoming more comfortable, which to a degree, for those who really need it, actually would probably be a lot of benefit. But for those who already have it, it starts to become a little more like diminishing returns. Who do you think is most interested in building capital and seeking comfort? The most powerful. They think it's theirs by right. They think they're owed the capital that can be made, and they think they are owed being comfortable at all costs. So design becomes a powerful ally for those who are powerful because they think it's like a right arm extension. But before everybody wants to quit design, what if saying no to projects wasn't about just being a difficult team member or being whiny, I don't want to do this project. What if instead of just having this personal BYOE, it was something bigger? What if instead there was a system of accountability that was a little bigger than any one designer on a team? Perhaps a code of ethics, some standards for practice, Licensing and accreditation could be a thing. It is in a couple of places like architecture already. Continued education and more. These types of like a network of almost like a web of counteracting devices might allow the design discipline to grow and mature from perhaps the arts and craft field to the trade field to the professional field we claim we are, and maybe sit alongside the other professions who have licensing and accreditation like law, engineering, medicine. And I want to go back and just recognize, because I mentioned it on the panel, I don't think design needs more gatekeeping. We have plenty of that already. I know there are a number of you in this room. I know I felt this. We already have plenty of that already. What I'm not asking for is slightly more accountability, a little different. And it's my hope that if this system accountability will occur, we might start to have a bit of a bifurcation between designers who are acting and looking to become more accountable, finding clients who are willing to pay for that work in an accountable fashion, separate from those who are practicing in an unaccountable way, being paid for by clients who are neither seeking it or will pay for it. I think we might head that way sooner than later. And I want to kind of give you a little peek into the future, because I think we might be getting there. This is a gift from me to all of the graduating students. This is a database of social change by design firms that we've been monitoring for about 2 or 3 years now, probably going back longer when we were still just a Pinterest page. But if you take a look at this, you'll see a database now of over 260 design organizations, one of which is ours, where we feel like there is design being designed differently. The design of the organizations themselves are being thought of differently than before. Their goals, their leadership, their process, everything is slightly different. I can't guarantee everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows for every studio, but there's a way bigger list than it was when we started our business. And we searched everywhere for things like this. So we maintain this list because we want to make it easier for people like you who are graduating to not have to struggle quite so much scratching to try to work out where are these places where design is done differently. There's a self-submission form. So if you see somebody that should be there, please add them to the list. And it's my hope that in this future world, we might try to see if we have designers looking to get to maybe closer to the rhetoric that we often say, where design is there to build power, and design could actually start to seek truth. That, I think, is closer to what the promise of design could be, rather than the more conventional commercial version that we've often seen to date. And I think we actually have mostly everything we need. Imagine this practice of people who were trained to handle ambiguity, trained to come up with new ideas on demand. Imagine that. That'd be great, right? I think we have it. I think we have mostly what we need to think of this new future. And I think we get there a little closer if we stop and listen to that quiet little voice inside all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience with all the technology. Oh, yeah, thank you. Am I taking questions?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay.
If you're up for
Yeah.
questions, we would like to open it up for anyone who's curious about something. Do you see any hands? I would love to know, George, did you ever get the sense that you worked with someone that might have been on the edge, where you were thinking maybe it's not aligned, but by working with them, you were able to have an impact in their own organization where they ended up changing because of the interaction with you?
That's such a good question. We get asked that a number of times, and it sounds like you're asking if you were to work with someone who was like borderline, could the work change them?
Yes.
I have not found that to be true.
All right.
It's a little bit, but maybe the analogy is like like Thanksgiving dinner. You know, when you usually have like a slightly racist uncle shows up at that dinner. Do you want to spend the whole dinner trying to convince them of something different? Or do you want to spend that time with people who are maybe already aligned? I find that our energy might be better spent with those who are already aligned. And it might take 10x the energy to do the work, 1 inch, however many feet we move, to maybe even move a millimeter with that other person who is so far away. And sometimes I think what's a little concerning is that as a consultant, we do use language in consulting that might make us feel as though we're getting closer when we're really not. Things like, well, they're going to spend the money anyway. Or phrases like, well, if they do it with us, at least we'll know we've done a good job. That type of stuff is sort of, I think, placating you as a consultant to feel better when really, I think in your heart, this probably isn't going to go anywhere. That's a very pessimistic view, but I do worry sometimes that we get co-opted in that conversation. So I get very nervous about those things. And we have a pretty rigorous gut check, and we're not afraid to have to walk away mid-project if need be. Typically, we try to walk away before the contract is signed, but mid-project has happened. It's scary.
I think a question that I have after seeing your breakup letter and the amount of money that you let go, can you talk a little bit about the projects or the clients that you have said yes to, and what that looks like?
Yeah, the clients we work with are like my dream come true. They're the unicorns. I'm thrilled to even know they exist. Half the time when we meet them, we go, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're a real person." And then we get to work with you. That's amazing. So that idea of pursuing unicorns is something I would have never allowed myself to think we could do. But what's counterintuitive is that when you say no to a lot of bullshit, you actually give yourself the time and space to spot unicorns because they're already there. So there's like a change in mindset. Like my studio and members of the studio have really taught me around changing my idea of what abundance mindset looks like versus scarcity mindset. I grew up with scarcity mindset because I'm an immigrant, and the idea of being abundant just sounds so alien to me. But I can do a good impression of one who has that now. And if you think through an abundance mindset, you realize there are unicorns to be found. You have to take all the noise out of your way in order to be able to see them. So the ones who do exist are really, really conscious of the work they need to do. They're conscious of their position in the system of things and are asking us, usually because they've tried everything and are really keen to doing something that would make a dent. And that ability to want to learn from their communities tends to make us incredibly inspired.
I have a question. Speaking about unicorns and hiring new people, what are maybe 1, 2, 3 questions that you ask folks who are interviewing with your company to ensure that they're going to hold the same values that you have as an organization?
That's so good. I don't know if I could quite recall the exact questions. I probably shouldn't say just because they'll end up being kind of my
I need some. That's what I'm asking.
Yeah. But there are a few things. We are looking for a few sort of like understanding around our business principles, which they don't need to know, but we should do a better job of explaining. There are some culture values around sort of flexibility and around understanding sort of how systems work. I think also being, good in quotes of design is only like a portion of the sort of evaluation, but really understanding just how complex a lot of these sort of systems are that work together. I don't know if I need an individual to say, my hands are stained, but if they did say that, that would be pretty amazing because I think everyone's hands are stained. We can't work and operate in white supremacy culture without recognizing our hands are stained from all of it. And I think that level of awareness is rare, but really notable for us, because I think it would also help us understand, even as a business specialist, I think we are also stained through capitalism, through wanting to be paid and through wanting to work contracts. So we're not somehow that special. We're just trying to do it differently.
I have a question going back to ethics. Because just yesterday I was talking to a PhD student who's looking at systems of representation and how right now we have a lot of conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion. She was coming back to school sharing from practice and really wanting to embed in the curriculum the sense of ethics. So very much what you're talking about today. How would you see it, or how would you bring that into the curriculum? Right now, everybody's trying to bring that awareness in our teaching, but I think you're trying to raise it to another level, right? Where we're not just all showing up with our own ethics, but rather having an understanding of what we're trying to do as designers, and that we have that as one of our North Stars. So
Yeah, it's really unsettling and awkward to bring up in a professional setting. Sorry, in an academic setting for a professional pathway, because we would say that you're going to have sort of conversations that you don't want to have, not only with students, but actually arm your students to have it with their employers. So for a lot of graduates, the idea of having a conversation like this sounds absolutely nuts. And I'd say that might be true for years. But the idea that you should ignore those feelings for that long time is also untenable, because it's going to bite you in the ass later. What I want to make sure that I teach a course, actually an ethics course at Northwestern, every now and again, and it's about just having people notice things, like a professional sense of noticing what is happening in you and noticing upon recognition of stimuli. And if the stimuli is that framing doesn't make sense, being disrespected, whether it's about how the team's been made up, whether it's about the timeline, that's then practical through to like moral duties. But I think the idea of like being able to professionally sense things and make sure that you feel like what those feelings are real and not to be dismissed could be a course. I'd say that one of the things about that 10 set of questions, which is the actual underpinning of the class that I teach, each week is a different one of those questions. We kind of go through them all. But the one that I find to be the most helpful is to recognize I think it was number 9, what is the cost of speaking up, and then what is the cost if we don't? I find that the cost of speaking up, a lot of people will not perhaps inflate, but feel like this is the only issue to have. Like if I were to say something, how difficult will that be for me later on? And I think that fear is real. The cost to you will be real. But I think we deeply discount how much it will cost you if you don't say anything. We like price it to pennies on the dollar. And we think that is totally fine. It will gnaw at you for years. And I think being able to have an avenue to be able to share it and say, look, something happened, something I don't feel right about, and it's still happening now, needs to have a place. And I think whether it's a class, whether it's a moment, whether it's just even having the professors be ready to have those conversations, would allow you to not keep discounting the value of it, because it is really real. Thank you. Right, these are hardcore questions. How are we doing?
I have one more over here.
Yeah.
Hi, I am not a designer.
Good for you.
I am a teacher and physicist. Yes, I'm a teacher and physicist. And however, I do feel like the principles of design and art really dictate a lot of the things I do in my life. And the values that you put up earlier by Dieter Rams, I think that's how you say it, right?
Yeah.
The principles that you put up there really dictate how I try and decide things. But you propose some new ideas, and I want to know what your picture of a designer would be according to you, right? Because they are clearly different from what is traditionally thought of as a designer, right? And so for someone who's not a designer, what would you say being a designer looks like in this new perspective?
It's a great question. Perhaps they do many of the practices that you would see coming out of a class like this. I think the adherence of at our studio to reading human-centered design still looks in many cases a lot like a traditional designer working on a project for Nordstrom or Amazon or something. But the big differences tend to be around framing, trying to understand really what is the nature of the question, having an ability to say no to it because I don't feel like this thing actually aligns with our mission and values. And then the longitudinal view of relationship building as a core mechanic, as opposed to simply designing stuff for its own sake. So what we tend to find maybe as a caution to some of the new designers we hire is I almost like to tell them, if you work here, it's going to kind of put a bit of a dent in your trajectory, because you're not going to end up with a portfolio like your teammates or your peers. Like we're going to really kind of mess up your whole vibe, sorry, because your stuff is not going to look like anything that your classmates at the same level have. Are you okay with that? And most people are like, yep, because they knew intuitively they didn't want that. So the sense that what we often have at our studio is just we want to do things not just because they're contrarian, but because so often what typical design looks like tends to be already geared towards a solution and geared towards commercialization. So if those things are taken away, functionally, your thing that you sort of naturally thinking, logically speaking, what you end up with is going to be different. I don't know how satisfying that is to you as an answer, but we are trying to do design differently. And I think our designers are too. How are we doing? Okay, yes.
Hi, George. My name is Stephanie. Thank you for being here today. This is maybe a little bit more of like a nuts and bolts design question, getting your hands dirty, but in terms of building power and in your design decisions, design practices, specific examples, what's kind of some of your favorite examples of those specific choices that the company has made in projects that have deliberately been to build power and you guys have seen an impact in that way?
Yeah, maybe two things that come to mind. One would be external, as in for our research participants. So one of the methods, not every project needs this, but in some cases we do. We try to create something called a design team, so that individual participants can become almost organized as a almost like a voting block, not just as someone we learn from and maybe extract information from. Not every project requires this, but when we can, we try to be quite thoughtful and careful around trying to set expectations for someone who is a nurse or a teacher, whatever it might be, in their regular life, and give them enough without feeling like it's a burden, but giving them enough power to say, look, you can actually change the direction of this, co-author these ideas, co-author the research, co-author a lot of the whole project. The other thing I'd say is a little more internal around wanting to disrupt how power goes is maybe trying to see if we can do this gut check every week. I've worked in many places. I think most of the people I've worked with at our studio have had this where they find out on Monday what their next project will be. So the idea that they might have insight into business development would be itself radical, but then be able to say no to it without repercussion, I've never seen anywhere. So we want to make sure that we can continue to maintain that, because if we ever renege on that offer of we want your feedback, but not really, just joking, that is, we can't recover from that. So if people say we can't do this project, we have to follow through. Or if they say, look, I have some really awkward questions, can you make sure you ask? I have to ask it. So I find that what we're doing is actually just holding up our end, and that doing so means we are sharing power with those who don't typically get it. Partly because we don't trust ourselves, but partly because we want to do it differently. I'd say those are the two that come to mind. One more? Okay.
Thank you very much for your time and your talk and for being here today. It's very inspirational. I'm taken with many of the ideas, the breakup letter and the gut check and all of those other things. Surely in your firm and in your own life, there's some difficult or disappointing moments. So I'm curious about, for yourself and for your firm and for your team, what you do to take care of yourself in those moments of disappointment.
We actually went through this very recently, and we've ended up now in a situation where we learn about our potential complicitness in making things worse in a city that we're doing work in. We learned this from research participants. And to a degree, I think because I actually had to confront it, I kind of freaked out. And I've now brought the whole project to an end. And looking back on it, that some of the team saying, did you really have to do that? Like, maybe we could have found a way. And I think it's because I have so little practice of really confronting someone live on a call and they're telling me, you're making things worse. I couldn't really handle it. So we've brought it to an end. One of the ways in which I've tried to kind of make sense of it is perhaps saying retroactively, maybe we should have seen the signs earlier, those types of things. But I've been using the language of, are we a good match? Not so that we can then use it for like, we're a good team, we're a bad team. They're a good client, they're a bad client. But rather, will we a good match for that project? And I don't think we're a good match. That's helped me kind of like take away blame and judgment, but rather alignment. And in this case, perhaps misalignment, enough misalignment that we should have seen it. But alignment and mismatch tends to be a way to kind of help me feel less judgy. Because I've had lots of practice at judging myself and making myself feel bad, so I don't need any more of that. But finding language to help me find more just like name it as it is, of match, mismatch, feels a little more true without the additional piling on of self-loathing, which I'm, prone to do. I think that may be everything. Thank you all so much. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you, George. So we have a 30-minute break right now before we have our